Greetings mortals, and welcome to another video. I'm Claire, and definitely not an immortal creature of the night, and I love sharing histories and telling my own stories around swords and the people who wield them. I love talking about arms and armour in general, as well as LGBTQI heritage and representation in art, history and media. Let's get nerdy about some cool weaponry. Halloween edition! The only thing I love more than swords and women with swords is Halloween and its multiple scary supernatural creatures. And amongst them, one of my favourite is the vampire. This folkloric being is usually, at least in a European context, an undead creature who has returned to suck the blood of the living. Fun! I mean, gross. Now, vampires, in as much as we're talking about evil entities returning to suck the lifeblood out of the living, exist in many different cultures beyond Europe. But the most popular idea of the vampire and where its name comes from Central and Eastern Europe. And its most popular ideation in popular culture comes from widespread fear around them in the 18th century. The vampire would then make its way into 19th century literature with The Vampire, with a Y, by John Polidori in 1819. And then what followed this was one of the most iconic vampire novels of all time. I'm talking, of course, about Carmilla. Huh? What's that? Dracula. Who? Alright, we know about Dracula. Dracula has inspired so many different versions of the pop culture sexy vampire, but preceding it by 25 years was Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu in 1872, and it details the vampiric undead woman Carmilla's inexorable attraction to a young woman whose blood she desperately wants to taste. That's right, 19th century lesbian vampires. Now, I can hear you say, Claire, come on, Claire. How lesbian is a novel from 1872 going to be? Sure, there might be lesbian subtext, but you're not telling me that we actually have a vampire novel that is about a lesbian vampire, right? Well, not explicitly, perhaps, but I'll let this extract speak for itself. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardour of a lover. It embarrassed me, it was hateful and yet overpowering. And, with gloating eyes, she drew me to her, and her hot lips travelled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine, you shall be mine, and you and I are one, forever." We love lesbian vampire representation. The problem is that as early as the belief in vampires has existed, so has been the compulsion to get rid of them. Well, if you didn't have a slayer at hand to kick punch the vampire while impeccably dressed and also in heels, there were other solutions at your disposal. Because if you, hypothetically, came face to face with a vampire hell-bent on drinking your delicious, delicious blood, there would be quite a lot at stake. So the very premise of staking someone, so impaling them with a sharp, pointy object, Vampire Edition, is to literally pin the vampire either to the ground or ideally to its original coffin to prevent it from rising up and becoming a vampire in the first place. In fact, with this visual, you'd need less of a short, stubby stake and more of a long spear. But the stake and its mallet is slightly more practical. So the stake and its mallet is usually made of wood. And where does this idea of wood come from? Well, it may have different origins. In a European context at least, the vampire could be either warded off or defeated with a Christian symbol. Just like a cross would ward off a vampire, a piece of wood like a stake, wood represents symbolically a piece of the original cross, and many of these stakes were made of aspen, a wood that was believed to be the original wood type of that original cross. Another popular belief is that wood, especially wood coming from fruit trees, represented life, so you're literally defeating a creature that represents death with something that represents life. And sometimes these Christian and folkloric and different mythological traditions all meet in the same place. For example, the use of ashwood for stakes is popular. Pliny the Elder has described it as useful to ward off all evil beings, and it is also the same wood type of Yggdrasil, the tree of life in Norse mythology. Sometimes though, vampire folklore takes you on a little spin and disregards these traditions entirely. For example, Dracula killed with a knife. Some sources do claim that metal or silver was actually best. In this context, wood was seen as a cheap alternative. If you can't bring a metal stake, wood is fine. This would also explain why many human remains unearthed throughout Europe have been found with bits of metal embedded in the torso, supposedly planted in the heart. Much of the fear in 18th century Europe was around the potential of a corpse rising up to become a vampire, so many of the measures were actually preventative. Some other ways of neutralizing the vampiric threat: decapitation, shooting a bullet through the coffin, right? Or, and this one is interesting, dismembering the corpses, burning the pieces, mixing them with water, and giving it to family members. A slightly more savoury solution in Romania: placing garlic in the mouth. A culinary contender in Germany: placing a lemon in the mouth. Because when life gives you lemons, prevent a vampire uprising. Or make lemon drizzle cake. Which brings us to what sparked this whole video in the first place: vampire slaying kits. Or, I should say, alleged vampire slaying kits. There's a lot to be very critically analysed about whether or not vampire killing kits are real, historical, 19th century artifacts. And the verdict is not looking good. Let's get into it and have a look at this vampire slaying kit that's being kept at the Royal Armouries. This includes an 1850 iron bullet mould and a Belgian style box lock percussion pocket pistol. It also includes a Book of Common Prayer from 1851. And no vampire slaying kit would be complete without a set of stakes and their mallet. And alongside it we have rosary beads and 3 bottles that are labelled as having originally contained holy earth, holy water, and of course our weapon of choice, garlic. Crush the garlic when you're fighting a vampire and also looking for some choice seasoning. It also has a crucifix and a piece of paper with a handwritten psalm. The name indicated on the box is Professor Blomberg and the gunmaker Nicolas Plomdeur of Liège, which is in Belgium. Only problem, a great many of these vampire slaying boxes indicate these names and they don't correspond to any known people who lived at the time in 19th century as far as we're concerned. Another really interesting detail: many attempts at making these boxes seem like real historical artifacts point to the novel Dracula as a cause for this 19th century fear and desire to protect yourself if you're travelling into Eastern Europe. Problem is, this directly conflicts with the manufacture of many of these weapons, especially the guns. Mainly date back to the 1830s, 1840s and 1850s, whereas we know that the novel Dracula was published in 1897. A 2009 Ripley's Believe It or Not press release related to the acquisition of such a vampire slaying kit claims that the kits were acquired by people in preparation of possibly meeting a vampire during their international travels to Eastern Europe, and the usage dates back to the mid-1800s. Most were created in the Boston area and were available by mail order. The kits were purchased by wealthy Americans headed to Eastern Europe. Transylvania then, Romania now. Travellers brought back terrifying tales of vampires with them from the region, well before Dracula was brought to life by Bram Stoker. But there's no actual evidence of this at all. Furthermore, there is speculation that the case itself, holding all this weaponry that is currently at the Royal Armouries, dates from the 1920s. And these kits only started appearing at a time in which horror films would have been increasingly popular. By all accounts, this whole kit story sounds like somebody trying to build up authenticity with these products by compiling different objects that would have been dated back to the mid-19th century, but with lots of inconsistencies. So most of the horror here is a lack of historical sources. A historian's worst nightmare. Far worse than vampires, and horrifying if you're a vampire historian. Not that I know any, personally. Moving on. This is why the Royal Armoury specifically indicate that it is presented as an interesting cultural artifact and a product of the pop culture of the 70s and 80s, which reflects the whole vampire obsession stemming from 18th century Europe into 19th century vampire novels, all up to the vampire pop culture horror film obsession that has persisted from the 80s and 70s to today. Which is great because Arms and Armour is not just historical artifacts, it's also the way in which it is presented and has influenced pop culture, and it's a great way to bring these different types of pop culture in terms of fantasy, in terms of horror, in terms of science fiction into the museum. But do we have any evidence at all that these fake kits, while being definitely fake, corresponded to some reality around having vampire slaying kits at the time? As Jonathan Ferguson, keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armouries, indicates in his really interesting piece around the vampire slaying kit in the collection, many weapons and everyday tools would have been used if you were scared of coming across a vampire at the time, so in 18th century Europe or beyond. Many everyday weapons and even just ordinary tools would have been used by anybody either trying to, as a preemptive strike, prevent a corpse from becoming a vampire, or actually scared of encountering a real live vampire. These could include a gravedigger's shovel, it's nearby, it's near the grave, it's handy, a kitchen knife, and quite literally, garden stakes when you're trying to cultivate a beautiful garden, but you also think that a denizen of the night is after your blood. It's multi-purpose. And you might also imagine that if you're a scared tourist in Eastern Europe, scared of encountering a vampire while you're on the move, carrying around a really heavy kit of vampire slaying implements in finicky slotted drawers is probably not your best move. So next time you encounter a vampire, oh, I don't know, don't slay them. That's so 19th century. It's 2020, I'm sure they've found some kind of vegan blood substitute by now. Maybe they're even immune to garlic and can participate in actual seasoned cuisine. Who knows? If you're unsure, just don't invite them into your home. And during a pandemic, that applies to everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further reading in the description down below. If you like this video, please like, comment and subscribe and hit the bell for further notifications. You can support my creation of educational and creative content around Arms and Armour, LGBTQI history and women with swords on Patreon. My social media, podcast on women with swords throughout history and culture, and webcomic around girls with swords is listed in the description down below. Stay safe, sword lovers and vampire lovers, and see you in another video.